Tonight, we travel back in time, not to castles and knights, but to bedrooms, brothels, and dark forest clearings. We often think of medieval times as prim, pious, and full of religious repression, but when it comes to sex, the truth is far more complex. Forget romanticized courtly love, or the sanitized tales of chivalry. Beneath the surface, medieval society wrestled with lust, shame, desire, duty, and even the supernatural. Sex in the Middle Ages was regulated by the church, monitored by kings, and often punished with harsh public consequences. But it was also deeply human, messy, passionate, and creative. From bizarre church teachings and bedroom taboos, to scandalous confessions, sex work, and royal affairs, we're uncovering the hidden world of medieval intimacy. So light a candle, get comfortable, and let your mind drift through time. This is what sex was really like in the Middle Ages. Sex in medieval times was more than an act. It was a moral battleground. The Catholic Church had an iron grip on people's thoughts, and nowhere was that more evident than in attitudes toward the body and pleasure. The Church saw sex as a necessary evil, acceptable only within marriage, and even then, only for procreation. Pleasure, sinful. Desire, dangerous. And yet, everyone from peasants to nobles found themselves in moral contradictions. Priests preached chastity, while nobles held mistresses. Confessors asked intrusive sexual questions: how often, in what position, with what thoughts, while publicly condemning lust. Books like penitentials laid out penances for every imaginable sexual sin, from masturbation to unnatural acts, including detailed punishment lists that now read more like absurdly specific erotica than holy guidelines. The paradox was this: sex was everywhere, and everyone was doing it. But shame surrounded it, and the more forbidden it became, the more fascinating it was. In the soft flicker of candlelight, the medieval wedding was as much a business transaction as a romantic affair, if not more. While love was a lovely bonus, the church and society both saw marriage primarily as a tool for reproduction, alliance, and control. Sex, then, was duty. For peasants, marriage often came early. A young woman, perhaps 14 or 15, would wed a slightly older man, maybe 19 or 20, whose family had saved just enough for a dowry. They might have met at church, or been introduced by families eager to join land or labor. Their union would be blessed not in grand cathedrals, but in front of the village chapel, or sometimes at the door. The church declared the couple married the moment they exchanged vows, no priest necessary. This verbal consent was legally binding, and many clandestine marriages were sealed with little more than whispered promises, and of course, consummation. A shared bed could be stronger proof than a wedding ring. For nobles, marriage was an entirely different affair, strategic, political, and often cold. A lord might marry a lady he barely knew, sent from hundreds of miles away, chosen for her dowry and bloodline. Their wedding feast might last for days, but afterward they were expected to retire and perform their conjugal duty. In noble households, consummation had witnesses. Sheets were checked for blood. Servants might stand outside the room, ready to report that the marriage had been made valid through sex. Despite all this formality, what happened behind closed doors varied widely. Some marriages blossomed into tender partnerships, others devolved into bitterness or silence. And many noblemen, free from love in marriage, sought it elsewhere, with mistresses, servants, or even courtesans. One curious custom: the church prohibited sex during nearly half the calendar year. Lent, Advent, feast days, Sundays. There were dozens of no-sex days. Married couples were expected to abstain nearly half the time. But how strictly this was followed? Well, that depended on the couple. Let's slip quietly into the shadows now, where whispers of forbidden desire echoed through cloistered abbeys and forest glades. If the church saw sex as strictly for procreation, then it also believed it had the right to police every detail of it. Sex had rules. And not just general ones, astonishingly specific ones. The missionary position was the only officially sanctioned one. Why? Because it was seen as the natural order, with the man on top, representing spiritual dominance, and the woman beneath him, passive, fertile, humble. Anything else, woman on top, from behind, standing, side by side, was not just unconventional, it was sinful. And some church officials claimed these acts could summon demons, warp the soul, or lead to physical deformities in the resulting child. The penitentials, those old rule books for priests, catalogued endless sexual sins and their corresponding punishments. A monk might prescribe 15 days of bread and water for oral sex, 30 days for masturbation, and 40 for intercourse in the wrong season. One section even condemned sex in daylight. Another discouraged sex on Thursdays. And don't forget, no sex while pregnant, menstruating or nursing. Of course, real people lived somewhere between these restrictions and reality. Lovers experimented. Married couples had moments of spontaneity. Forbidden pleasures were whispered about in taverns and behind market stalls. And yet, fear lingered. Many truly believed that sinful sex would not only endanger their soul, but bring about sickness, storms, or even demonic possession. Some medieval texts describe sexual misfires, such as a man becoming impotent due to witchcraft, or a woman bearing a child with animal traits due to lustful thoughts. These superstitions reflected a deep anxiety about the power and mystery of sex. In some towns, public punishments were used to shame sexual deviance. Adulterers were paraded with signs. Fornicators might be whipped or made to wear special clothing. And yet hypocrisy ran deep. Clergy themselves were often caught in scandals. Priests had mistresses. Monks fathered children. Bishops paid off brothel debts. Sex, it seemed, was something no rulebook could fully control. In the winding back alleys of medieval cities, where torchlight flickered against stone walls and the scent of ale and hearth smoke lingered, another kind of economy thrived. One that the church disapproved of publicly, but society could not function without. Sex work. Brothels existed in nearly every major medieval town. Some were hidden behind taverns, others operated openly under state supervision. In places like Paris, London, and Florence, licensed brothels paid taxes and were inspected. Yes, inspected. Authorities wanted to ensure moral containment. The idea was, if lust couldn't be eradicated, it could be managed. Women who worked in these brothels came from many backgrounds. Some were orphans or widows, others were simply poor and seeking survival. A few entered the trade voluntarily, though many were coerced by circumstance or family. They weren't always considered criminals. In fact, during festivals and holidays, prostitutes were sometimes invited to participate in parades, or allowed to wear fine dresses and jewelry, just for the day. But their status was fragile. They were tolerated, not respected, protected, but only just. A curious rule. In some cities, sex workers were required to wear yellow. In others, striped hoods or bells. The goal was public distinction, visibility without status. Brothel life itself could be harsh. The women lived together, often under the watch of a madam or overseer. Clients ranged from sailors and soldiers to merchants and clergy. Privacy was limited. Diseases were rampant, and while many of these women had resilience and wit, their lives were difficult and precarious. But sex work wasn't just for the poor. In wealthier circles, courtesans, a more elite form of sex worker, entertained nobles and scholars. These women were educated, clever, and often multilingual. They discussed poetry, politics, and philosophy. Their companionship was as valued as their beauty. Some even influenced diplomacy and literature from behind the veil of intimacy. And yet, hypocrisy reigned. The same noblemen who visited courtesans would publicly denounce them. The same priests who preached abstinence would secretly frequent brothels, and then, with a bowed head, offer confession. By the late medieval period, cities began pushing back. Brothels were closed or relocated. Punishments for sex work grew harsher. But the trade never disappeared. It simply moved, as it always does, into the margins of shadow and silence. Now, let's slip deeper into the quiet chambers of medieval womanhood, a space rarely written about, yet pulsing with quiet complexity. Because while men wrote the laws and sermons, women carried a different kind of knowledge, lived experience. Medieval women were often taught to be modest, obedient, and pure. Desire, if acknowledged at all, was seen as a male domain. But under veils and within diaries, whispers of female desire emerged. One rare manuscript from the 15th century, written by a nun, described bodily sensations during prayer so vividly, scholars still debate whether it's mysticism or erotica. In herbal texts and folk remedies we find clues. Recipes for aphrodisiacs, herbs to arouse the womb, potions to quicken longing, or calm the pulse of passion. These were passed among midwives, wise women, and quiet rebels. The church feared these women. They called them witches, heretics, or worse. But for many, They were the only source of knowledge and comfort in a world that denied women autonomy. Married women, too, had their secrets. Some practiced contraception, despite church bans. They used animal intestines, soaked sponges, or herbal pessaries to try to prevent pregnancy. Others sought abortifacients, risky, but sometimes the only choice in desperate circumstances. In literature, women's pleasure was occasionally acknowledged, though often framed as a warning. Courtly poems spoke of wanton maidens and passionate widows, always punished or tamed by the end. But the mere fact that these tales existed shows that women's desire was a known if feared force. And then there were the confessions. In dusty church archives across Europe, records of medieval confessionals reveal startling honesty. Women admitted to affairs, to same-sex desire, to longing for men outside their station. Some confessed fantasies, others begged forgiveness for impure dreams. These private moments, recorded in ink by trembling hands, remind us that medieval women were not emotionless vessels for childbirth. They were human. They longed. They dreamed. They resisted. They carved out space for pleasure in a world that told them not to. Beneath the rigid laws of church and crown, another world quietly existed. A world of longing glances, coded letters, and stolen moments, where love blossomed not between man and woman, but between souls society refused to name. In medieval times there were no words that fully matched what we today call gay, lesbian, bisexual, or queer. But that doesn't mean those relationships didn't exist. They did, hidden in monasteries, behind castle doors, on the long roads of pilgrimage and war. Among monks and nuns, deep emotional intimacy was common. Letters between brothers in Christ and sisters in cloisters often read like love poetry. One 12th-century monk wrote to another, "Your absence scorches me like flame. I long for the light in your eyes, the warmth of your arms." These letters were usually dismissed as platonic, but sometimes they weren't. In cities, men might meet in bathhouses, stables, or market stalls. Some dressed as women to slip unnoticed into feminine spaces. There are court records from 14th-century London that describe men who took male lovers and danced in women's clothing. The punishment was severe, but the risk didn't stop them. In convents, some women formed lifelong partnerships, calling each other spiritual sisters. They lived together, prayed together, and in some cases were buried side by side. The church viewed this as chaste companionship, but the emotions in their letters tell a more tender, passionate story. There's even an old court case in the Alps, where two women, one disguised as a man, married and lived together for years before discovery. Their story ended in imprisonment, but the love was real. Folk tales tell of shapeshifters who change sex to be with their beloved. One tale from medieval France describes a knight who becomes a woman by moonlight, to lie with his female lover, blessed by forest spirits who take pity on their love. Despite the silence in the official histories, queer people have always existed. They carved out spaces in the shadows. They loved bravely, even when the world refused to acknowledge them. And in their quiet courage, we glimpse a timeless truth. Love, true love, has always found a way. Let us turn now to the realm of dreams and darkness. To the stories told by firelight, and the spells whispered in secret. Because medieval sex wasn't just a matter of the body. It was tied to myth, magic, and the great mysteries of life and death. In a world ruled by superstition, sex was full of omens. A man might wear a wolf's tooth to boost virility. A woman might bury rosemary under her bed to ensure conception. And if a child was born under a full moon, villagers might whisper that passion had summoned something wild. Fertility magic was everywhere. Women tied herbs in bundles under their skirts. Men drank mixtures of honey, wine, and crushed animal parts. Some wore belts inscribed with runes. Others sought the help of midwives and wise women, who performed secret rituals with eggs, bones, and blood. Some believed sex could summon spirits, that the dead might watch from the corners of the room, that orgasm could open portals, that too much passion would attract demons and too little might anger the gods. There were also tales of magical lovers, the incubus and succubus spirits who seduced sleepers at night. Monks claimed to be tormented by these creatures, blaming them for impure dreams and nocturnal emissions. One famous legend tells of a knight who unknowingly married a demon in human form, discovering the truth only after she vanished into fire. Erotic dreams were thought to be more than just dreams. They were omens, warnings. Priests advised people to confess them. Some believed that if a dream brought pleasure, it meant a demon had entered their bed. Yet not all stories were dark. In folk tales, lovers defied curses. Witches brewed love potions from rose petals and wine. Forest spirits blessed unions with rain. And star-crossed pairs would sometimes disappear into the trees, never to be seen again. Reborn, the villagers said, in another form. Desire, after all, was a mystery the church could not explain. And in a world where the line between the spiritual and the sensual blurred, sex became something larger. A myth, a ritual, a kind of magic. Before the modern age of texting, love languages and dating apps, affection was communicated through subtler means. A shared look across the market square. A hand that lingered just a moment too long during a transaction. Or the quiet exchange of a token, a ribbon, a carved token, a pressed flower. In the Middle Ages, the body was both sacred and suspect. Every gesture held weight. A kiss could be a greeting, a contract seal, or a promise of intimacy. Touch was layered, regulated by custom, charged by emotion, and closely watched by society. For noble women, a brush of the sleeve or a dropped glove was sometimes the only way to indicate desire without words. For peasants, affection might come through labor, repairing a roof, baking extra bread, tending a shared garden. Even punishments involved the body. Public shame was physical. Stocks, whipping posts, and shaved heads were used to enforce morality. The body was made a billboard for sin. But bodies also rebelled. Lovers created secret spaces, a hayloft, a hidden grove, a storeroom after curfew. There, free from judgment, they could explore the simple act of closeness. A kiss in the dark was more than a kiss, it was defiance. Some tales speak of lovers who carved their initials into tree bark, or who wore matching talismans hidden beneath their clothes. In a world of limited privacy, such gestures were lifelines. Touch in the Middle Ages was never casual. It was charged, deliberate, and unforgettable. Forget the myth that medieval people were always dirty. Bathing, while not daily, was often part of life, especially for those with means. Public bathhouses dotted cities like Paris, Bath, and Cologne, offering communal tubs, heated stones, and even scented oils. For some, these were places of hygiene. For others, of pleasure. Bathhouses were gender segregated, but rules were often broken. There were bathmaids and bathboys, private rooms for the wealthy, and rumors of rendezvous behind curtained alcoves. Many bathhouses even served food and wine. A soak could last hours. What did they bathe with? Rose water, lavender oil, honey, vinegar, and even wine. Some believed certain scents increased desire. A pouch of dried herbs tucked into clothing was believed to attract love or ward off unwanted attention. Hair was perfumed. Beards were oiled. Teeth were cleaned with crushed mint and ash. Beauty rituals existed long before modern spas. In poetry, the scent of a lover was described in detail. Her breath, like sweet clover, wrote one knight. His hands smelled of smoke and rosewood, wrote a lady in a diary. Body care, then, was not just about health, it was about seduction. To touch clean skin, to breathe in a lover's scent, to share a steaming bath in candlelight, these were the hidden luxuries of love. Let us end the extended tale with the softest part of the night. The hour after intimacy, when breath steadies, hearts slow, and words come easier. Medieval songs often spoke of these moments. A man singing to his lover from below her window. A woman humming a lullaby to the man who must leave before sunrise. These were called obedes, dawn songs, gentle, aching, and filled with longing. In these quiet hours, lovers talked of the future, even if they had none. They shared dreams, superstitions, and stories told to them as children. They traced old scars and gave them meaning. They made promises they knew they couldn't keep. The bed itself was sacred. Beds were rare and expensive, passed down in wills, adorned with carved posts, layered with furs or rough linen. To share a bed was to share trust. Sometimes, love was carved into the wood. Remember me, forever joined. Faint words, nearly erased by time. The church feared what was said in the dark, because intimacy gave people power. Emotional power, erotic power, the power to choose one another, even in secret. History rarely records pillow talk, but it existed, soft and steady as candle smoke. Let us walk now through cloistered gardens, where stone walls rose tall, and ivy curled over chapel windows. Here, in monasteries and convents, men and women pledged their lives to God, swearing off possessions, ambition, and desire. But vows of chastity did not erase longing. Monks rose before dawn, their days structured by bells, prayers, and silence. Nuns labored in gardens, copied texts, and tended the poor. Yet, within these rhythms of devotion, the body did not forget its hunger. Some records reveal quiet scandals. A young monk exiled for inappropriate closeness. A nun discovered pregnant. Even bishops whispered of fleshly battles waged in candlelit hours. One famous case comes from 14th-century France, where a prioress was accused of keeping a secret lover within the convent walls. They met at night in the herb room. When discovered, she was cast out, but her letters, preserved by scandalized church officials, speak not of guilt but of grief. For many the struggle was internal. Confessionals overflowed with admissions of impure thoughts, dreams, or the temptation of a fellow devotee. Monks fasted to, quote, cool the humors. Nuns beat their chests or lay on cold floors in penance. Yet others found joy in closeness. Hand in hand during prayer, kneeling side by side at the altar. A touch was charged. A glance became a poem. For those who lived behind monastery gates, sexuality didn't vanish, it transformed. It became spiritual yearning, sublimated affection, or sometimes, forbidden passion. In the end, the human heart did what it has always done. It searched for connection, even in the silence of sacred halls. Step into the bustling market square now, where linen snaps in the wind and boots strike stone. Here desire lived not in whispered words but in what people wore, how they moved, and the symbols they stitched into their lives. Clothing in the Middle Ages wasn't just practical, it was expressive, coded, and often sensual. A noblewoman's sleeves might reach the floor, designed to trail behind her, drawing the eye. A low-cut kirtle could scandalize or seduce. For men, tight hose emphasized the legs, and codpieces became more exaggerated by the late medieval era, suggesting virility and status. Colors too carried meaning. Red meant passion, power, sometimes sin. Blue suggested purity, often worn by brides. Green was the color of renewal and also of flirtation. Jewelry and talismans told hidden stories. Lovers exchanged rings, brooches, or embroidered favors to tuck into sleeves. Some wore charms said to stir desire, carved bones, pressed flowers, or stones soaked in wine. Body language was its own language. A dropped scarf, a glance over the shoulder, the deliberate brush of hands when passing bread. In certain circles, fashion became a battlefield of morality. Sumptuary laws were passed to keep lower classes from dressing above their station. But desire doesn't follow rules. Servants stitched lace into collars. Young lovers dyed their tunics with stolen berries to mimic noble shades. One tale tells of a maiden who wore a rose-shaped clasp at her waist, a signal to her secret lover, who waited by the stables after dark. What we wear has always carried longing. In the folds of cloth, in the gleam of a buckle, in the quiet rebellion of choosing a forbidden color, medieval people dressed their desire, boldly, defiantly, beautifully. And finally, let us drift into the cold mist of medieval nights, where desire meets death, and the boundary between passion and haunting grows thin. Throughout Europe, stories circulated of lovers who returned from beyond the grave. In one tale from Bohemia, a widow dreamt of her late husband nightly, until he began to leave marks upon her skin. She awoke bruised, kissed and frightened. A priest claimed it was a sin resurrected. Villagers called him a ghost lover. Elsewhere, people believed sex in cursed places, abandoned mills, pagan shrines, crossroads, could result in haunted children or spiritual possession. In one case, a man was excommunicated for bedding his lover atop a saint's tomb. She later claimed to be followed by whispers in Latin. There were also protective rituals. Newlyweds would burn rosemary and salt their bedposts. Some slept with iron knives under their pillows to ward off incubi. If a baby was conceived on a haunted bed, a priest might bless the child at birth. And yet, not all ghosts were feared. In some ballads, a dead lover returns not to torment, but to comfort. A knight appears to his grieving maiden, holds her once more, then fades into the moonlight. Haunted beds, vanishing touches, love that defied death. These tales remind us, even in the dark, desire lingered. It passed through walls, crept into dreams, and stayed long after breath was gone. Because in the medieval world, love was not only a mortal thing, it was eternal, and sometimes it haunted. Now let us wander into the perfumed courts and ivy-wrapped balconies of the medieval elite, where desire wore the disguise of poetry, song, and longing glances. Courtly love, fin amour, was not about marriage. In fact, it often thrived precisely because it was forbidden. A noble knight pledging himself to a married lady. A queen exchanging secret verses with a court poet. These relationships were rarely consummated, yet they burned with slow intensity. Rules governed everything: the right way to look, to speak, to praise. A knight might fast for days to prove devotion. A lady might give her favor, a glove, a ribbon, a ring, to be worn in battle or in song. Love was ritual. Flirtation was warfare. One wrong word could shatter the game. One daring poem could open hearts. Many of these affairs remained in the realm of fantasy. But not all. Behind closed curtains, words turned to touch. Troubadours spread these stories like wildfire. Tales of forbidden kisses, stolen nights, and heartbreak at dawn. Some even wrote guides, manuals on how to court a woman, how to test her affections, how to navigate the agony of unreturned love. Courtly love was both performance and passion. A way to express desire in a world that feared it. A way to taste freedom, even in chains. And so, under the guise of art, hearts raced. Drift now into the candlelit chambers of mystics, those strange and radiant souls who claimed to touch the divine and felt it touch them back. Throughout medieval Europe, mystics, especially women, wrote about spiritual ecstasy in language so sensual, it often blurred the line between divine and erotic. Saint Teresa of Avila, though later, famously described an angel piercing her heart with a flaming spear, her soul consumed with sweetness. Earlier mystics used similar metaphors: wounds, fire, trembling limbs, tears of bliss. To them, spiritual union was a kind of intimacy. The body was not rejected, it was the vessel through which God could be felt. And so, these women, often cloistered, silenced, dismissed, became authors of some of the most visceral, emotional, and strangely erotic language in the medieval world. Church authorities were uneasy. Were these visions holy, or were they temptations? Some scholars believed these mystics were simply describing what was missing: human intimacy. But others argue they were redefining it, elevating it, proving that the soul too could ache and yearn and be filled. In their quiet ecstasies we find a radical truth. The sacred and the sensual are not so far apart. In the hush of a medieval village at dusk, a child becomes something new. Their voice changes, their body aches, their mind stirs with thoughts that feel both thrilling and terrifying. Coming of age in the Middle Ages was a rapid transformation. There were no long adolescent years, only the swift passage from childhood to labor, marriage, or war. For girls, their first bleeding marked the start of womanhood. Mothers whispered warnings. Grandmothers prepared herbs. Some girls were wed soon after, though many were still so young they feared the night more than they desired it. For boys, signs of manhood came with expectations: work, defense, restraint. Fathers or older brothers might warn of dangers of temptation. Priests preached against lust. And yet, the stirrings of desire could not be stopped. There were no school talks, no guidebooks. Curiosity was met with fear or silence. And still, secret knowledge passed between friends. A farm girl telling her cousin what she heard behind the barn. A shepherd boy watching a lord kiss a maid in the orchard, and wondering what came next. Even in their confusion, young hearts dreamed of kisses, of skin, of the mystery behind the veil. Adolescence was not spoken of, but it shaped everyone. Softly, deeply, forever. Sometimes, desire stretches across great distances. A merchant's wife waves to her husband as he joins a caravan. A soldier clutches a ribbon beneath his armor. A lady waits on a castle wall, scanning the horizon for a falcon that carries a letter. Distance was a part of medieval love. Men went to war, pilgrimages, trade. Women stayed behind, sometimes praying, sometimes worrying, sometimes seeking comfort in another. Long-distance love sparked a new kind of intimacy, the love letter. In careful script, lovers poured out longing. They spoke of dreams, fears, aching bodies. Some letters were poetic, others raw. Many survive today, testaments to devotion across miles. One knight wrote to his betrothed, "Your name warms me more than the sun. I have kissed the wax seal 100 times. Absence became its own form of touch. And yet, not all separations were willing. Some lovers were torn apart by law, by scandal, by status, a noble girl sent to a convent, a peasant boy conscripted into service. Lovers promised reunion, but time drifted. Some never found each other again, but their words remain, like pressed flowers in the book of history. Even apart, they loved. To end this expansion, we go back to the beginning: childhood beds, bedtime stories, lullabies whispered in firelight. Because even in infancy, the seeds of how we understand love, touch, and connection are planted. In the medieval world, children were not shielded from tales of passion or warning. Folk songs told of cursed lovers, enchanted kisses, maidens who defied suitors. Legends featured trials of love, always with a moral tucked beneath the magic. A girl might learn from a lullaby that love could lead to both bliss and ruin. A boy might hear a tale of a king betrayed by desire. These were not just entertainments, they were education. Desire was something to be feared, to be respected, but also to be sought. Mothers would stroke a child's hair and sing of heartbreak. Grandfathers told stories where love required sacrifice, and between the notes of these songs, a generation learned what it meant to yearn. The medieval world didn't give sex education, it gave narrative. Rich, layered, and unforgettable. And so by the time a young person first felt desire stir in their chest, the songs had already taught them: love is a risk, a beauty, a storm, a story. In kitchens filled with dried herbs and soft whispers, love was brewed as much as it was felt. Medieval folk believed desire could be stirred like soup, crafted, bottled, and delivered with trembling hands. Love potions were made from wine, steeped with wormwood or cinnamon, honey thick with rose petals, or milk boiled with nettles and cloves. Some recipes were innocent, others less so. There were charms too: knots tied beneath clothing, bits of ribbon hidden in a shoe, hair braided with thread and buried beneath moonlight. To attract a lover, one might carry a pressed daisy wrapped in linen. To keep them faithful, a woman might slip crushed snail shells into his drink. Yes, snails. Alchemists promised it worked, but love magic was dangerous. If discovered, one could be branded a heretic, or worse, a witch. Still, people took the risk, because to be unloved was its own kind of curse. Along the dusty roads that led to holy sites, Canterbury, Compostela, Rome, walked more than just the pious. Among pilgrims were sinners, searchers, and secret lovers. Pilgrimages offered escape, a chance to slip away from village eyes, from marriage, from judgment. On the road, a widow could become a maiden again. A monk could pretend he was not bound by vows. A merchant's daughter might lift her veil and walk freely in the sun. There were hostels and inns, dark corners and shared blankets. Some pilgrims sought forgiveness, others found passion. Tales of love on the road abound. A knight who seduced a nun on the way to Jerusalem. A miller's son who met a French girl near the shrine of Saint Denis and never returned. The church warned against such things. But even saints could not control hearts that wandered. In a world ruled by men, widowhood was one of the few times a woman could become free. She wore black, she prayed, she wept. But beneath her veil, she often breathed easier. A widow no longer belonged to her father or husband. If she had wealth, she controlled it. If she had children, she raised them as she pleased. And if she had desire, she could indulge it in shadows. Some widows remarried. Others took lovers discreetly. A few moved into religious life. But many simply lived as they wished, quietly resisting the roles they'd once been bound to. One tale tells of a widow in Normandy who secretly wrote love poetry under a male name. Another, of a woman who ran a covert network helping other widows avoid remarriage. In grief, they found space. In loss, they found self. Not all desire was for the living. In medieval legend, some saints were said to radiate such beauty and purity that even hardened sinners fell in love with them. One tale tells of a man who tried to steal a kiss from a statue of St. Agnes. Another, of a nun who dreamed nightly of St. Michael, blushing each morning at his imagined touch. Church officials feared this, called it spiritual corruption. Some even claimed demons used saints' likenesses to tempt the devout. Statues that seemed to move. Paintings that made hearts flutter. Desire was a fire no one could fully contain, and even the most sacred faces could kindle it. Let us now examine the darker side of medieval intimacy, where power blurred the lines of desire. In tales of chivalry, knights rescued damsels, pledged fidelity, performed brave deeds. But real life was murkier. A knight's title granted status but also unchecked authority. Peasant girls had little say. Even noble women, if married young, had little choice. Consent was a whisper, easily ignored. Some documents record complaints filed, quietly, fearfully, by women who claimed a lord took liberties. But few were believed. Still, not all knights were cruel. Some formed bonds of real love with those they were expected to control. Others renounced violence altogether and entered monasteries to escape the weight of their pasts. The truth is, love and power were often entangled. And the deeper we look, the more we find stories that defy the simplicity of fairy tales. Medieval literature is filled with dream sequences. Rich, strange, symbolic. In The Romance of the Rose, a man dreams of plucking a forbidden flower in a walled garden. In Pearl, a father wanders into a dream to speak with his dead daughter in heaven, though his language often turns strangely sensual. Dreams were a way to explore desire without punishment. A woman dreaming of a golden stag might be expressing longing. A monk dreaming of fire might be revealing temptation. Authors used metaphors like rivers, locked gates, winding staircases and birds, each one layered with sensual meaning. Even stories meant to warn often seduced. Now let us turn to a subject history often overlooks: the lives of those with disabilities in the medieval world, and how they experienced love, intimacy, and desire. Disability was often viewed through a spiritual lens. Some believed it was punishment for sin, others saw it as divine trial, but rarely did they see disabled people as sexual. And yet they were. Court records describe blind women who ran inns and took lovers, deaf men who carved love charms. One famous text describes a one-legged poet who composed erotic verses for noble patrons. Desire doesn't disappear with a limp, it deepens. Despite stigma, many found love, some through marriage, others through friendship that blossomed. Some lived in hospitals where nurses became companions. Others formed families of choice on the outskirts of towns. Their stories were quiet, but they existed. In a world ruled by mystery, not science, childbirth was both miracle and terror. When something went wrong, when a child was born with deformities or illness, the whispers began. He was conceived in sin. She dreamed of a demon. She touched herself beneath the moon. Monstrous births were blamed on desire, wrong timing, wrong partner, wrong thoughts. One chronicle claims a child with goat hooves was born to a woman who had impure dreams during Lent. Another tale speaks of a child born with two faces, one smiling, one weeping. The mother had, they said, loved two men. The guilt fell on women. But between fear and folklore, some mothers still named their children with love, still wrapped them in linen, still kissed their strange, sacred faces. You might not expect it, but medieval cathedrals, those towering stone monuments to faith, were not without sensuality. Gargoyles with open mouths, carvings of lovers in tangled limbs, grotesques locked in embrace. Why? Some say to scare, others say to mock sin, but some believe they were reminders, memento corporis, that flesh and spirit are not enemies. In stained glass, you'll find Eve offering fruit with parted lips. In tapestries, a stag enters a maiden's chamber. These images blurred the holy and the erotic. The church tried to control meaning, but artists whispered with chisels and brushes. They left their secrets in stone. Sex in the Middle Ages wasn't just for the young. Older lovers, often overlooked in both history and poetry, carved out lives of intimacy that were tender, deliberate, and deeply emotional. An old widow tending her garden might still remember the heat of a stolen kiss. A retired knight with aching joints might still hum the obade his lover once sang. Though fertility faded, desire did not. Some saw grey hair as wisdom, not decay. In monastic life, older men and women found peace in holding hands, praying side by side, sharing warmth beneath cloaks. And even in age, the body remembered joy. We end now in the quietest place, the deathbed. Here, stripped of status, armor, beauty, people remembered who they loved. Some confessed secret affairs. Others cried for a lover's hand one last time. A few spoke the name of someone they had never dared to say aloud. Confessors heard everything: guilt, passion, longing. Some priests wept beside them. One woman asked to be buried with a ring she never wore publicly. A man begged for forgiveness, not from God, but from the girl he left behind. In their final moments, Many spoke of touch, of warmth, of a face in the dark. Because in the end, what we long for is never just heaven. It's the memory of being held. And now, dear listener, we find ourselves at the end of a long and winding path. A candle has burned low beside us. The stories have been told, the secrets shared, the old scrolls unrolled, and read softly into the dark. We have wandered through centuries, not just through facts or folklore, but through the quietest chambers of the human soul. Not the soul as defined by theologians or kings, but the soul that stirs in a shared glance, that aches with longing under woolen blankets, that remembers a scent long after the body is gone. What began as a tale about what sex was really like in medieval times became something far more intimate. We have seen that the people of the Middle Ages were not so different from us. They too wrestled with guilt and desire, with duty and craving. They too feared rejection, longed for approval, wept from loneliness, laughed in bed, whispered into pillows, dreamed of things they were told not to dream. A young noblewoman, placing lavender in her bodice, and hoping the stable boy will notice. A monk, clutching his chest during evening prayer, unsure if the pounding in his heart is for God, or for Brother Thomas. A midwife holding the hand of a widow who fears she will never be touched again. These are not just characters in the past, they are us. Strip away the armor, the headdresses, the parchment, and the candle smoke, and what's left is something universal, the yearning to be seen, to be known, to be loved. If you close your eyes now, perhaps you can still hear them. Not the clang of swords or the chanting of priests, but the softer sounds, the ones that history books forget. The shifting of straw in a shared bed, the scratch of a love letter being written by moonlight, the rustle of clothing removed, not with haste, but with care. The slow exhale of someone finally, after months or years, being held. These are the true sounds of history. Not wars, not coronations, but tenderness. The sound between the bells. We've learned that the church tried to contain desire, to box it into marriage, to suffocate it beneath guilt, to smother it in fear. But desire is not a candle that can be snuffed out. It is wind, it is rain. It finds the cracks in the stone. Even as priests preached abstinence, people met in meadows. Even as scribes copied rules, lovers copied poems. Even as bishops passed laws, mistresses passed through secret doors. The more the world said no, the more the heart whispered yes. Because love is not obedient, it's wild, it's sacred, it's human. So much of what we know about the medieval world comes from men. From monks, from rulers, from scribes who decided which stories to keep and which to bury, but the most important histories were never written. They were passed in hushed voices behind market stalls, sung as lullabies in back rooms, sewn into hems, buried in gardens, carved into tree bark. They lived in the eyes of the woman who lit the lamp, in the hands of the man who returned from war and knelt wordlessly beside his wife, in the tear that slipped down the cheek of a girl leaving her lover's cottage for the last time. These are the histories we carry in our blood. They are not written, but they are remembered. We sometimes believe we are more enlightened now, that we have moved beyond shame, that we are freer, wiser, more expressive. But are we? Do we not still blush, still hide, still ache for the right words, still lie awake wondering if we are too much, or not enough? Perhaps the only real difference is that we have more words now, more mirrors, more images. But the core remains the same. A touch still means something. A kiss still lingers. A glance can still ruin us, or redeem us. The medieval mind didn't divide the world neatly into sacred and sinful. The line between the two was blurry, trembling, and often crossed in the dead of night. Desire could be divine, prayer could be sensual, dreams could become real. And real life could feel like myth. A woman could feel closest to God in the arms of her lover. A monk could fall to his knees from the weight of his own longing, not just for heaven, but for a face he could not name. The body was not the enemy. It was the gate, the mystery, the answer. Tonight, we have held the forgotten, the peasant girls who never made the scrolls, the boys who kissed in barns and never told a soul, the widows who lit candles for husbands and for lovers, the monks who ached, the nuns who yearned, the midwives who knew. We've whispered their names without knowing them. We've invited them into our rooms with soft voices. And in doing so, we've made them real again. And you, Dear listener, you have traveled far. Through fire-lit bedrooms and haunted forests. Through poems and punishments. Through saints and scandals. Through longing and laughter and letting go. Perhaps some part of you recognized yourself along the way. In a chambermaid's hope. In a knight's letter. In a midwife's secret. In a widow's quiet strength. That is no accident. Because these stories are not just medieval, they are human, they are timeless, they are yours. Let the candle burn, and so now, as your eyes grow heavier, as the world outside your window grows quieter, let us leave the past gently behind. Let the candle burn a little longer. Let the stories drift with the smoke. Let your breath slow. Let your heart rest. The people of the past are not gone. They are just sleeping. And maybe they are sleeping beside you, in spirit, in memory, in the soft way you now carry their stories. Sleep well, dream deeply, sleep well, dear one. May your dreams be full of whispered poetry and warm hands. May you walk again through stone corridors, garden paths, and starlit hills. May you remember what the world has tried to make you forget. That you are not too much, that your longing is not a sin, that your body is not a burden, that love is not a luxury, that tenderness is power. One final truth. If history teaches us anything, let it be this. No matter the time, no matter the rules, no matter the shame, love always finds a way. And tonight, it found you.